We have Dr. Pam Palmater, and today we talk about the reconciliation between Indigenous peoples, and we talk about very deep topics such as missing and murdered Indigenous women and impoverished communities on reservation and the racism that's taking place. And the reason this is relevant to happy hustling is because one of our 10 alignments of being a happy hustler is selfless service. We're going to be diving into this episode of the Happy Hustle Podcast. Do you want blissful balance in your personal and professional life? Great. What's up, guys? My name is Carrie Jack, and I want to help you happy hustle a life you love, one full of passion, purpose, and positive impact. I'm a lifestyle entrepreneur, a professional model / actor, a digital marketing specialist, a podcast host, author, a biohacker, an eco-warrior, a martial artist, a hippie cowboy, and a humanitarian. My goal is to educate, inspire, and entertain you to live a life of passion, purpose, and positive impact. It is time to happy hustle your dream reality. All right, Dr. Pam, welcome to the Happy Hustle Podcast, my friend. I am super excited to rock the mic with you.
Oh my gosh, me too. I feel so happy as if I'm on the Happy Hustle podcast, and I always learn from you. I love your work so much.
Thank you. The feeling's mutual, Dr. Pam. I mean, you are considered one of Canada's top 25 movers and shakers. You're also an internationally renowned speaker, prolific author, award-winning Indigenous podcaster, a Mi'kmaq lawyer and activist driving reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. You're also a professor and chair in Indigenous governance at Toronto Metropolitan University. You're also a Mi'kmaq Nation citizen and member of the Eel River Bar First Nation. And you're a mother, and most importantly, you are a happy hustler. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about the reconciliation with Native peoples, as well as, how happy hustlers out there listening and watching can actually become activists in their own right and really stand up for causes that they believe in. And this is a topic, I haven't really covered because I haven't found someone of your statute that can really, bridge the gap. And I'm really personally moved by your work. And also, growing up in Montana, I have many Native friends, and seeing the injustice and what, what has been done, it really hurts my heart. Like how twisted and sick this history is. It's really a shame. And it's people like you who are helping reconcile it. And I just hope to, help megaphone your voice today. So let's first start, as I always start, before we get into all that good stuff, with something interesting about yourself that not too many people know.
I would think that not too many people know that I drive motorcycles and dirt bikes and travel all over the country on my motorcycle with my kids.
Whoa, that's pretty cool. Okay, what kind of bike do you have?
Well, for the highway, I have a Africa Twin. It's pretty big and heavy, so I don't ride it all the time. And then I have a bunch of dirt bikes, Honda CRF 300. I have
Let's
a
go.
Suzuki 230 and a TW because I'm in the TW Unicorn Club.
Let's go, girl. That is amazing. I love to hear you're out there getting after it. Um, super cool. I also have sport bikes and love motorcycle riding. So, yeah,
Nice.
out here in Montana, we have a lot of open country and beautiful mountain terrain to ride, as I know you do too. So let's kick things off with a bang. First and foremost, okay, give us a little history from your frame of the current state of affairs with Native peoples and what got us to this point.
Well, I mean, settlement, colonization is really what got us to this point. And not just settlement in and of itself, but the kinds of laws and policies and practices enacted by official governments. So, not so much settlers, but actual governments
Mm.
that amounted to what we would call today genocide. So, killing Indigenous peoples to remove them from their lands, causing them physical or mental harm in terms of all of the oppression and torture and things like that, the physical and sexual abuse, and what we call residential schools, or what the US used to call boarding schools. I mean, the theft of lands and resources, broken treaties. I mean, all of these things have culminated in not just a history of injustice, but an injustice that continues today. And I think that's where people get lost. They think, well, that was in the past. Can't we move on? And my response is always, I'd love to move on. If we just stop doing all of these injustices, we'll be happy to move on.
Yeah. It really is such a dang shame.
Mhm.
The colonization of the Americas, and just the
Mhm.
decimation of the indigenous peoples at large. I mean, for those people who aren't well versed in the history, do
Mhm.
you have any books or resources that you could point someone to that maybe does a decent job with the synopsis?
Yeah. So on my website, pampalmater.com, you can go to the section called publications, and there are a host of short writings, longer writings. I have 3 books that talk about all of these injustices and how they manifest today. So, how they
Mm,
manifest today are still governments taking our kids and putting them into foster care at rates higher than when there was border school, boarding schools and residential schools, for example. The abnormally outrageously high shootings of Native people in both Canada and the US by police, often unarmed, the insane rates of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls in Canada and in the United States. So, all of these things are things that I cover in my, especially my last book, Warrior Life. Very short snippets. You want to know what's happening without having to read all of the history books? Well, here's what's happening in all of these areas, the root causes, and what we can do to end them.
mm, yeah, that really is the most powerful thing, to know the root cause and then actually
Mhm.
action steps for people to help support, the progress forward. I
Mhm.
mean, there's a movie I watched called Somebody's Daughter. Are you familiar with
No,
this movie?
no.
So it showcases the missing and murdered Indigenous women in Montana, and man, it I had no idea until I was educated on the absolute terror that takes place on these
Mhm.
reservations. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what happens in my frame of reference. Individuals, terrible individuals, come onto the reservations, and they basically steal these indigenous women, and then they
Mhm.
rush to get them off the reservation because the tribal police don't have jurisdiction off the reservation. And then they basically get lost in this bureaucracy of FBI, local police, and all these other discombobulation legally, and
Mhm.
oftentimes they don't get found or recovered or saved. Is that
Mhm.
just? I'm very ignorant, so please help fill in the gaps where I maybe was not accurate.
No, so that's exactly what's happening on and off reserves in Canada and in the United States. So there was a time a couple decades ago where politicians and police law enforcement used to say, we don't need to look into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls because it's just Native men doing all of this. So I had a problem with that because I don't care who's doing it. We still have
Yeah.
to protect Native women and girls, but we found we had a national inquiry into this issue here in Canada, and we found that, in fact, the majority of people that are hurting Indigenous women and girls here in Canada and also in the United States are non Native people. So, for child porn rings, human trafficking, um, all the things that people do, or I guess I should say primarily men do, to women, very violent. And then to add to that problem, so there's the danger about what's happening. Then to add to the problem, the attitude of many in law enforcement, where we just don't care. It's just a Native woman or it's just a Native girl. So we don't care. We're not opening a file. We're going to assume that they ran away. We're not going to investigate. We're not going to take extra steps to protect these women, even though we know where all the dangers are. For example, man camps. So camps that are by oil fields, pipelines, any kind of mining where you have thousands of men all located close to native territory. And the influx of men and money and drugs and alcohol increases rates of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. Police just don't deal with it to the extent that they should. So it's a multitude of problems. We haven't solved it. We're only now just talking about it because of Indigenous women like Secretary Holland, who is from the Pueblos of Laguna, who said, hey, we need to start talking about this issue and take action.
Mm, yeah. Oh my goodness. It is literally, I can't think of a more nightmare situation. And it it really, it's the whole process of how we've interacted
Mhm.
as a civilization with indigenous peoples that I see such a problem with, specifically, talking about how these government handouts have hindered Native American people and also, indigenous peoples at large. What, just break it down, that process, and where you think it really went awry when it comes to these you know these government handouts.
Well, I am so glad you raised that because you and I have had conversations before in different contexts. And I love how you always prompt me with one of those common misconception things that First
Mm,
Nations here in Canada or Native American tribes get so called handouts. Keep in
yeah.
mind the lands and resources that were stolen from Native people fundamentally support all of the wealth and business activity that happens in both of our countries, yet we don't get a portion of the taxes, fees, fines, licenses, profits from that. So, what happens is over hundreds of years, all of the value of our lands and resources, trade networks, and everything else has been expropriated by these governments. And now we're getting back tiny, minute fractions of our own wealth. It's often misunderstood to be a handout, but in fact, we're just getting minuscule amounts. And we know in Canada and the US, chronic underfunding of social programs and services. So the minute amount that we do get is not enough to sustain our communities. And there's not always economic development opportunities that are contiguous to or near any of our reservations. So think about the money that was supposed to happen every year, to be distributed every year under treaties, or the resources that were supposed to be provided every year under treaties. These are federally protected treaties and in Canada, constitutionally protected. So every time they are not sharing the resources, which are ours, this situation gets worse and worse and worse. So I'm so glad you raised that because so many people think that's the case.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know how to even start to reconcile the situation personally. Like, I know there has to be a path forward, but
Mhm.
I think about the adage, you know, give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, he eats for life. And, you know, in my ignorant frame, rightfully so, I'm admitting it, where I think oftentimes I see at least some of my native friends, they they almost, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, on the reservations, they haven't necessarily been fishing for themselves because of these reparations, and they have then a lot of time on their hands because they're not actively pursuing, not in, this is a
Mhm.
stereotype at large,
Mhm.
but please
Yeah.
correct me. Like, do you see that as an issue? And if so, you know, how do we fix it?
Again, you always raise the most fundamental issues that really act as a barrier to,
Yeah.
Americans and Canadians working with Native people and really understanding where they're come from. And that saying, teach a man to fish. Well, we're like, teach a man to fish and they will steal it all and the water and the land that it's on. And then we don't get to fish. And that's not
Mm,
just like a metaphor. In both Canada and the US, for hundreds of years, our traditional subsistence practices, whether it be hunting, fishing, gathering, trade, has been criminalized so that, here in Canada, it's not just criminalized, it's regulated so that for decades we've been prevented from hunting and
mm,
fishing and gathering and trading. Some of our trade networks have been now relabeled as contraband and organized crime and things like that. So it, there's just no place for us to be. People are saying, well, you need to get out and support yourself. And it's like, great. Can you let us do that? Because here in
mm,
Canada, we have something called Indian Act, and Indian affairs officials wouldn't even let us leave the reserve to go to work. And every time we were successful. So, for example, both in Canada and the US, when we were starting farms and when we were, having lots of products to bring to market, what happened? They would change the laws and policies to prevent us from doing that so that we wouldn't be competing in the same market. So every time we try to do something, Canada or the US intervenes to make that very, very difficult, or
mm,
to set up a situation where all we can do effectively is have casinos, and that's supposed to be our economic development, where the majority of tribes and First Nations, both Canada and US, don't have the market to have casinos, and not everybody wants to have casinos. So when you think about it, there's still so many barriers to us being able to do these things, and that's not even taking into consideration all of the intergenerational trauma that
mm,
has been and continues to be inflicted on people. So think about human trafficking and all of the abuse and taking kids and putting them in foster care and creating more trauma. You're setting up a situation where a number, not all, but a number have mental health challenges,
mm,
challenges with addictions. But even I'm afraid to even say addictions, because then people say, oh, the stereotype. We know the stereotype is wrong. We're not more likely to be alcoholics than anybody else. We just happen to have more historic and ongoing trauma. So you put all these things together and it
mm.
makes it difficult. I do want to just say, as kind of a final point, obviously I don't speak for all First Nations in Canada. There's no one person in the US that speaks for all tribes. So it's really important when trying to engage with these issues to listen to a wide swath of Indigenous voices, because one reserve might be very wealthy, another might be the most impoverished in the country. You can't even say the conditions on all reserves or reservations are the same. It really is regional.
Yeah. Yeah, that really is the truth. You have to
Mhm.
take, you know, multiple different viewpoints into
Mhm.
consideration because obviously
Mhm.
we're talking about a very vast array of indigenous peoples and
Mhm.
places. You know, I just feel I'm personally very interested in, and I recently heard that there's a big fentanyl issue from the cartel. Actually, I know this is getting off a little bit from Happy Hustling, but I feel like you're the person who can help me bust some of these myths and so that I can relay better information. But a lot of drugs are coming from the cartel down in Mexico and potentially infiltrating reservations and getting people hooked on fentanyl. Have you seen an increase in drug usage in the most recent years?
I haven't, and I'm always a bit leery about what some of the media reports as, criminal Mexicans or criminal South Americans coming in, or that they're the blame for all of these things when long before they were even allowed to immigrate to the US or Canada. Americans and Canadians, they have their own set of organized crime that engage in, mafia type dealings
Yeah.
or drugs, like you name it, human trafficking that's been going on literally for hundreds of years. So I don't like to say, well, here's the statistic on it, unless I know specifically, oh, well, here's a report shows how
Yeah.
many Mexicans are responsible for fentanyl. I just don't know. I do know, though, however, that lots of groups, organized crime, especially from all backgrounds, look to use and exploit Indigenous peoples, especially those who are vulnerable, those who are living on the streets, those that are coming out of group homes, things like that, in the hopes of exploiting them for their own criminal purposes.
Hmm. Yeah, it really is a shame. And I mean,
Mhm.
again, I think each situation, each, reservation is going to be different. I'm
Mhm.
just, you know, it's such a gut-wrenching topic at large.
Mhm.
If you had to kind of take the current state of
Mhm.
Indigenous peoples and distill it into the key three like core issues that Indigenous peoples are currently facing, what would those three be?
Well, I think overall, it's a respect for our right to be self determining. So, our sovereignty, our right to govern our territories and resources the way we see fit, so we can help our own people. We don't need the
Hmm.
small trickle of money from governments. We want to be able to manage our own resources because we believe, many of us believe, that we could address issues like the high rates of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. If our sovereignty was respected, we'd be able to have jurisdiction over people off reserve or reservations that are hurting our women, for example. So I think that the crisis of murdered and missing is huge. I think the rampant poverty, and again, in not all tribes, not all First Nations, but the rampant poverty caused by the theft of lands, broken treaties, failure to share resources, chronic underfunding, things like that. I think we need to address that. It's pretty hard to ask people to come up with a business idea or lead your people when you're at home as a chief or a chairperson trying to make sure that everyone has something to eat the next day.
Hmm.
So I would say, murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. I'd say that the rampant poverty, it's really creates horrible socioeconomic statistics. And then I think the last thing would really be anti-Indigenous racism that manifests throughout all institutions, whether it's law enforcement, killing or over incarcerating our people, Canada and the US, or whether it's the healthcare system that denies healthcare to people based on racist assumptions. Someone comes in having a stroke, you assume that they're drunk, so you don't treat them. So that happens
Hmm.
a lot. And these are the things that we just don't talk about. So I think I mean, there's just so many issues, right? More than
Yeah.
just three, but those three, I think, could really have a significant impact in our quality of life, our well being, and our ability to nation build in our sovereign nations.
Yeah. Yeah, I would 100% agree. I mean, you mentioned the missing and murdered Indigenous women, the impoverished, you know,
Mhm.
people and really just the extreme lack of resources on the reservations, and then you mentioned just the racism that is still
Mhm.
ever present across um, many different institutions. I definitely have seen it, and I can only imagine how that plays out
Mhm.
in the effects. Let's talk about the solution, because I don't want to
Mhm.
only focus on the problem and make it, a doom and gloom
Yeah.
segment, really, because I'd love to help you and to the
Mhm.
Indigenous people and everyone out there listening just get crystal clarity, will you, on what we can do about it? Maybe people who aren't listening, who aren't Indigenous, but have the inclination to help support. What are some of the key things that an average citizen, either in Canada or the United States, or maybe just around the world at large, could do to support Indigenous peoples?
Well, I think that's the most important question of all, really.
Right.
Like, there's lots of issues, just so many that we couldn't possibly, as individuals, just deal with all of these all at the same time, right? So we call that, how do we engage in reconciliation with Indigenous peoples? And
Mm,
reconciliation just means learning about what happened in the past, how it connects
yeah.
to the injustices that are happening right now. How do we prevent harm in the future? Right. And then how do we make reparations? That's why the land back movement is so popular right now, because there's a multitude of ways to help. And then I guess, people would ask, okay, in reconciliation and in thinking about what they could do, is really your why. And I think at the end of the day, whether it's a religious why, a moral why, a personal why, you have a connection with someone why, or you're intermarried into a tribe why, that's really secondary in nature. But I think ultimately the why is we don't want to live in a world that is based on injustice and suffering and harm to the benefit of a few. We don't want that. We don't want that in our families. We don't want that in our communities. And
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Apologies for interrupting your programming. But I have to tell you, the best investment you can make in yourself is one in which helps you acquire skills. You've probably heard people talk about, oh, just invest in yourself and you'll be successful. Yes, that's true to a degree, but you have to invest in skills that will ultimately help you achieve your desired results. And I think one of the best skills one can possess, be it an entrepreneur or an aspiring entrepreneur, is the sales sword. Really knowing how to sell, utilizing pressure free persuasion, which will make you more money and more impact. Now, if you want to know how to sell more efficiently and effectively, I just launched a sales course called The Proven Roadmap Process to Selling Millions of Dollars and helping you to increase your conversions guaranteed. And you can get access to this new sales course that the Happy Hustle is launching at thehappyhustle.com/sales. And if you act fast, you'll get it at the lowest price it'll ever be available, because we are launching it and we want to gain amazing testimonials and social proof to further share this knowledge. So if you act fast, you can get it at the lowest price it'll ever be. That's at thehappyhustle.com/sales. Now let's get back to this episode.
so
Mm-mm.
is this the charitable thing to do? And I would argue, no, it's not. It's actually the law. Because in the US and Canada, there are human rights laws that we are bound by, Native specific rights like treaty rights we're bound by. And we have this political, larger communal commitment to democracy, equality, justice, rule of law, restitution. So all right, you're there. We're now okay. We know what reconciliation is. We know the why. What do we do about it? And when you think about it, it's really about all of our collective futures. So I say the first step, the most important step, is to learn, self educate, because what we've been taught in school, not factually accurate. What we see in the media often leaves out more facts than reports facts or provides any context, or you don't see us at all. When we're talking
Mm.
about, police shootings, you rarely hear mention of, hey, police shootings, not just in African American communities, but in Native American communities. So it's
Mm.
the media doesn't do a good job of educating people. So sadly, you have to take up that burden of learning, relearning, unlearning, and there's a multitude of ways to do that, right? You can read op-eds written by Native people, books by Native people. You can listen to podcasts on your way to work or in the gym, so you can hear all different Indigenous voices talk about these issues and the different solutions. You can watch people on YouTube. I mean, even TikTok has native TikTok where we're reporting
Mm.
on current issues, what needs to be done. You can follow all of us on native media. The concern people present to me is, oh my gosh, now that I've learned all this, there are so many issues. I just feel overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. And I say,
Yeah.
okay, start local. Start local. Okay. You are not going to solve all of the Native American issues or First Nation issues in Canada and the US. What state are you living in? What are the local tribes or nations in those states? What are they making a public call to action about? Do they need you to
Mm.
sign a petition this week to save wetlands? That's something that's easy and quick to do. Maybe next week they're asking you to advocate to support Native American laws to protect murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. You can do that. You don't have to have a doctorate in all of these issues. You don't have to understand all of these issues to say, okay, I'm on their territory. They're making calls to action for justice. Here's what I can do. It's an ongoing thing. And of course, there are some people who have time or expertise or lots of resources and funding. Or lots of land that they can return to Native Americans in the US or First Nations in Canada. Business opportunities, partnerships. I mean, just the act of not acting in a discriminatory manner and looking for ways to support local Native people. There's just so many things you can do, and most of them don't even cost money. It's what are they asking
Mm.
you to do, and take their lead. And if you do those things and you commit to do it forever, because we're in a forever relationship, that's what the treaties were about. We were going to live together and make sure that we were, mutually beneficial relations, protect one another, advocate for one another. If we just live in the spirit of that treaty relationship that has no end, we got this made. I mean, we don't have to
Mm.
wait for governments to solve it all. We, the people, can do a lot of the solving of these issues.
Mm. Amen. I mean, I love it. So, recapping,
Mhm.
start local. If you're out there, really look in your area. What can you do locally to support Indigenous peoples?
Mhm.
Let them tell you what support is necessary at this given moment. Maybe it's signing a petition, maybe it's volunteering your time, maybe it's raising funds, maybe it's, something else. But just listening and starting local, I think, is really a great step. Um, let's talk about people at large
Mhm.
out there listening, the happy hustlers. They really want to get involved in activism,
Yeah.
uh, work that speaks to their soul.
Mhm.
Maybe it's with Indigenous peoples, maybe it's for the environment, maybe it's something
Mhm.
else,
Mhm.
just becoming more supportive of causes
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and injustices that really speak to our soul. What would you say to someone out there who maybe has been on the fence or reluctant to become an
Mhm.
activist or to start their nonprofit, and how do they take that first step forward?
Another really important question, because it can be intimidating. You have anxiety. Look, I don't know what I should or shouldn't be doing in the business world, in the nonprofit world, in education, like in all areas of community life. What should I be doing? And I think that by taking the initiative to learn, like what's happening, what's going on, what are the opportunities, are there any calls to action on, hey, there's business opportunities or nonprofits. You mentioned environmentalists, or conservationists, for example. That is one of my favorite examples, because when you think about it, who are the first and foremost, since time immemorial, caretakers of the lands, waters, plants, animals, birds, and insects in what's now known as Canada and the US? it's Native people. So we have
Hmm.
traditional Indigenous knowledge that's very site specific, that talks about what we have to do to make sure we don't overfish, or to make sure that we're not causing runoff, that we can prevent floods by not cutting down too many trees. So that's literally rich for environmentalists and scientists or nonprofits who care about the environment, or saving animals. Any of those things, look to Native people. What are they saying? What have they published? What are their calls to action on, hey, we need to protect these wetlands in order to save all of these species? Oftentimes, I find the problem is because the media doesn't cover this enough, because government doesn't do a great job at educating, and because we didn't learn it in school, it's this void of knowledge. And once, say, environmentalists know that, hey, the Navajo in my territory know exactly what we should be doing, or the Cherokee in my territory know exactly what we should be doing. Imagine how powerful we would be advocating for something like the environment if we were doing it together. And on a positive side, we're starting to see that happen. We're starting to see that happen in Canada. We're starting to see that happen in the United States. And for some organizations, they've been doing it a long time. The key here is to be a respectful ally, following the lead of Native Americans and First Nations, not a savior. So, not, I'm an environmentalist, I think we need to set this up as a park, and that's how we're going to protect
Mm.
organizations, that do environmental. When maybe Native Americans are saying, you know what? That might not be the solution. We might need to do something, intervene in a very specific way to save the territory. So it's, don't, assert your solutions over a territory for environmentalism or anything else until you know what are Native Americans saying, where are the synergies there. And I think in all issues we would be so much stronger coming together.
Yeah. I love that statement you said, be an ally, not a savior. And I think that is such a powerful phrase. And, letting Indigenous people lead the charge in
Mhm,
those different,
mhm,
movements, I think is huge. And really just being an ally and how can we support. Um, it's a very powerful way to approach reconciliation and also just
mhm,
getting involved in general in something. This is why this is relevant to happy hustling. One of our 10 alignments of being a happy hustler is selfless service, right? And selfless service in this context means supporting causes that you believe in and causes that need support. And this is definitely one of those causes. We're talking about helping you know Indigenous peoples and our planet and really future generations with our time, our money, our resources. We have the acronym GIFT: give, insight, finances, and time.
yeah.
And I think even if it's just insight to a movement that maybe you have an expertise in graphic design, you can give some
Mhm,
insight on how to make the marketing land more effectively, right? Finances. Maybe you have not so much time or insight right now at the moment to give, but you have some money. There's
mhm,
another amazing way to give. And then time. Time is often our most precious commodity.
yeah.
And, you know, if you can give it and volunteer in organizations, is there any specific organizations that you are, very much supportive of and that you would recommend others search into on this topic?
Well, because I'm an advocate of start local, it really does depend. Now, because I'm an Indigenous person and been working in advocacy my whole life, I focus on all of the informal groups. So, say, for example, someone has been murdered or gone missing, and you see a coming together of all the grandmothers, the Native grandmothers, and they're having a march or a rally, or they're trying to, get attention on an issue. I would want to support that in the first instance because they're not organized. They don't have money. They're not, they're not funded in any kind of way. And I find the grassroots movements are in fact the ones that are getting the most amount of work done. That's not to say the rest of them aren't. There's political Native organizations, there's advocacy or education Native organizations, and you can find the ones in your state. But I think the starting local and looking at what are grassroots people, what are the grassroots youth saying? Some of them are
Yeah.
like, hey, we don't want to be shoved into foster care anymore. Here's ways you can help. And they're the ones out there, doing a little march or something. You can show up. The thing is you're going to have a different amount of time, energy, resources, skills at different points in your life. So maybe this year it's about giving financial donations, but maybe next year it's like, you know what? I want to try my hand at boots on the ground. I want to
Mhm.
meet people in person. I want to go to powwows. I want to support these marches and rallies and teach-ins and protests. So do that. It's whatever your background is, because and I just love how your book is all centered. I mean, it all comes down to what I'm talking about, this
Mm.
selfless service, that it's not for awards, it's not for selfies, it's not for business promotion. It's literally, how much do you do on the back end where your face is never shown and you don't get any acknowledgement? You're doing it for the good of people. And to me,
Mhm.
that's what it means to selfless service. Is like what it means to be a warrior in Native ideology, because warriors aren't soldiers in combat. Warriors in our teaching are the people who love their people so much, the ones with the biggest hearts, that they're the ones who step forward every time whenever there's a need, despite personal sacrifice, despite our time, despite people calling us out saying, who are you? It's about transcending all of those societally imposed barriers to say, no, I'm gonna show up for my people every single time, and understanding that warriors see their people beyond their own family,
Mm.
beyond their own neighbors, beyond their own, little groups, whatever they be, churches or cities or, environmental groups, and really seeing it about humanity. And
Mm.
if it can't just be good for your group. It's got to be good for everyone, or it simply doesn't work. And so happy hustle is all, that's where it all comes down to. And I just love that, because it really is in sync. This
Yeah.
concept of warrior and selfless giving and love for people, unconditional love, no judging for the
Mm.
circumstances that they're in, however they got there. And you and your, the selfless service and how you can do that really aligns.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. And I echo the sentiment. I really do. I feel like this is a people problem right now. Like we're all one, and we need to help each other. And
Mhm.
it's not for the glory or the accolades or for business growth. It's
No.
really because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I'm just really grateful for your work and how you show up in the world and really sharing this message. Where can people go to learn more about you and what you're up to?
Well, I could send people to a bunch of different domains, but that wouldn't be very helpful. So if you go to my website, which is pretty unimaginative, pampalmater.com, my last name is Palmater, you will find all of my podcasts. So I podcast there for kids. So your kids can learn about this stuff and be warriors in the world, social justice warriors. I have the Warrior Life podcast. It talks about, you will hear from Indigenous peoples all over Canada and the US saying, here's what the problem is, here's the solution, here's what you can do about it. I mean, that's literally the theme of my podcast. YouTube videos to help educate on all of these issues, publications, like whatever I have done, whatever I'm working on, plus resources. You can go to that website and say, hey, I'm a podcast person, I'm going to go over here. Oh, no, I'm a YouTube person, I'm going to YouTube's.
Yeah.
No, I'm a nerdy reader like I am. I'm going to go to all the publications. It's
Yeah.
basically however you digest information all through that one website.
Hmm. All right. That is a great website for everyone to check out. It's Pam and then Palmater, Palmater.com. And
Mhm.
also check out the Warrior Life podcast. If you like
Mhm.
podcasts, that's, a simple, you know, start to just dive into some of her episodes. I do want to ask you, Pam, before we sign off, a couple of our more traditional happy hustle questions. We call these questions the happy hustle hacks, will you? But
Mm.
really, it's a tip, a tool, a tactic in a couple different disciplines. First being health. If you're going to be an activist, you need to have energy, right? You need to be, taking care of oneself. What is something you do, maybe something uniquely, Dr. Pam, that we could deem a happy hustle hack for your health?
Well, I mean, this is not going to sound unique or original, but it really is guaranteed time for your family and your community. So whether that's your babies, grandbabies, whether it's your brothers and sisters or your community, like for me, it's my First Nation and engaging in all of our cultural ceremonies, that has such a way of grounding you and filling
Mm,
up your heart and lifting your spirits, because advocacy work and social justice is not easy. We're dealing with the worst issues. And so you need that to kind of fill up your spirit. And I think for me, the other thing, and this is something that an elder told me once. She said, I know advocacy now includes social media and getting the word out there and organizing and sharing information. But she said, don't let it in. And I was like, what do you mean? Well, there are people who are going to praise the work that you're doing, and that's going to feel good. So you're going to be tempted to let in all of the negative comments where people are like, who are you? And we're never going to do that. And just spewing hate and racist comments and threats and commenting on your hair and face and clothes. She said, if you let in all of those good things on social media, you could be duped into letting in all the bad things, which just is this horrible drain on your soul. I mean, nobody wants negativity. Constructive conversations, questions, constructive criticism, great. But don't don't let in those things. And so those are really the two things that I try to do. I don't always get it right. Thank goodness family brings you back down to earth. Like, don't think that you're a big shot, Missy. You get here, you get home because you have obligations. Oh, great. And the same thing when I'm just like, oh, I can't believe they're saying this about me on social media. When the elder says, it's not about you. Don't make this about you. Set your ego aside. This is about the people. What are you doing for the people? And so those two things, they keep me grounded.
yeah, I mean, I love that you mentioned just the mental health component of really, connecting with those you care about, and
Mhm.
also not letting the toxicity of social media get to us. That's huge. Let's talk about money. Money,
Mm.
I always like to ask, what's a happy hustle hack for you? Maybe something that you do to save or invest or spend wisely. Because obviously if you're going to do this advocacy work, you need to have some resources. So anything come to mind for a happy hustle hack in this arena?
Yeah, my first hack, I guess, in this area is look for all the free ways you can help. People think it's always about money. And of course, money is foundational for many things, court cases and things like that. But there are more free ways that you can help that are minimal effort but can have big impact. You can go to websites, like native websites, that say, hey, here's the 7 free ways that you can help. Here's the 10 free ways that you can help. And you look and it's like, wait a second, there's no money aspect to this. That's because we have different resources at different times. I am lucky that I work full time as a professor. And so my university is very supportive of social justice activism. So effectively, my work and my personal life is social justice activism. I'm effectively working as an advocate. So not everybody's in that situation. In fact, you could be working in a law firm where you're not allowed to talk about any of these issues. You could be working for government. You can't have a political position on any of these issues. But there's nothing to say you can't follow Native people on social media and like it, and then trigger the algorithm so that, whatever platform it is says, hey, I'm going to show this Native person to more and more people, which means we get our word out to more and more people. Like something as simple as following us on social media does that. Sharing our resources, that does that. You can hire us as the next person to come in and train your company or train your nonprofit. If you're hosting a great big giant speaking event, compensate Indigenous peoples and say, hey, the next person you're going to listen to is someone you wouldn't think is relevant in your area, and it's a Native person. So find ways, not just the free ways, but the ways to incorporate into what you already do. You're already going to pay for a speaker for your convention. Those monies are already there. Why don't you make it a Native person who talks about the issues that you care about? So it really is finding those ways, especially when you don't have funds.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, just providing opportunities too. And, this is a really great way to support, starting simply by just following more Indigenous people. And yeah, I mean, it seems like low hanging fruit because it is. Everyone has social media and you could just go out there and today take action, you know. Um, let's put you through the rapid fire round. This is really just random questions, and I just ask you and you answer honestly. First thing that comes to mind. Okay. And this is more about Dr. Pam directly, not necessarily the concepts at large that we're talking about. So I'm curious to hear your responses. All right.
Okay.
Favorite food? Go.
Pizza.
Favorite movie?
Predator.
Favorite book?
We Were Not the Savages.
Best business advice?
Don't make it about you. Make it about the people you serve.
What's your spirit animal?
I don't have a spirit animal. We don't have that in our culture. So I don't have one. But if I had to say which one am I most aligned with, I'd have to say it's an eagle or a snowy owl because of their insight over the higher level insight. They see the big picture.
I love that. 3 things you're most grateful for?
Oh, my kids, my culture, and all of the teachers I've ever had who have taught me something that I can use to make other people's lives better.
Amazing. And if you had a billboard for the world to see with your last piece of content on there, what does that billboard read?
It would say, stand up for human beings, love human beings without judgment.
Amazing. Crush that rapid fire round, Dr. Pam. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you. Thank you for sharing your love, your light, your wisdom, your culture, your Indigenous people's history, and really, just your authentic self and what you're doing in the world. It really is making a massive difference. And I'm just grateful to know you and looking forward to future collaborations and supporting you any way I can. So thank you again.
Thank you. And I just love how happy hustlers end up attracting, to one another, and we end up collaborating on wonderful things. So keep doing your great work. Here I am, and now I'm connecting to other happy hustlers. What a wonderful privilege it is to come on your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you again, Dr. Pam. Now, before we do, I just want to mention, check out Pam Palmater, PALMATER.com. Check out the Warrior Life podcast. If you had to kind of just tie a bow on everything we said today in a short snippet call to action style, what would you say to all the happy hustlers out there?
I would say be part of humanity. Love people without judgment. Strip away politics, religion, personal point of views, all of your bad experiences that you've had, and just say, look, if there's human beings that need help, I'm there for it. I'll be a warrior for other human beings.
Mm, I love that. Now, final question, Dr. Pam. What does happy hustling mean to you?
To me, it really is about, by taking care of other people, by serving other people, you indirectly, and even sometimes without knowing, are serving yourself. Think
Mm,
about all of the science we have now, where when you're giving to other people, you live longer. Your mental health is better. You're
yeah.
creating a better world, a better community. And don't you want to live in a better world and better community? So, all the ways in which you help other people, it's good for your heart and soul and mind, body, and spirit too.
Love that. Mic drop, y'all. Dr. Pam, thanks again for watching and listening. We are out. Peace and love, everyone.